on this week's Mailbag episode, recapping the weekend series and the last series of the regular season for the San Diego Padres against the Arizona Diamondbacks, as well as getting into the playoff picture and how we got to look forward to today's games to figure out who the Padres will be playing, and as well as getting into some of your questions, because it is a mailbag, obviously. All that and more. Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Padres, your daily San Diego Padres podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Padres podcast, which is part of the Locked On Padres podcast, Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day for Monday, September 30th. As always, I am your host with sometimes, occasionally, and again, clearly not always the most, Javier Arraez. You can check out my baseball-related work elsewhere at places like Just Baseball, and also my other podcast called Baseball vs. the World, which is about general baseball stuff. Follow that at Baseball vs. World on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, you know what it is. And of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Javipeno, Javiipeno, and then at LO_Padres. And also reach out to those accounts at the end if you want to be featured on the mailbag, which is today's episode. And we're going to be getting into those mailbag questions later. But first, we got some things to talk about. And also, guys, you can start this season with a big return on FanDuel, sponsor of today's podcast. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets. Guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Wow. What can I say? It's been a long ride, ladies and gentlemen. It has been a very long ride. It has been I would say until the last 2 months, an up and down ride, right? Like, we had a lot of weirdness occur for much of the season, but then it really balanced out, and then the Padres became the team that we know and love. And look, we're going to recap this weekend series really quickly. I feel like there's not too much to talk about. Frankly, because this is a series that basically didn't end up mattering past Friday, right? Because the Dodgers had won, and unfortunately the Padres had not swept the Dodgers, and they had not won two out of three. So nothing was up for grabs, and that was it, right? And you saw that because they then decided to not start Michael King in the series, or Darvish, I believe. So I think that was okay. I thought that actually Darvish, as I talked about on Friday, I actually thought that they might give Darvish a little bit of a start just in case. Maybe try to get his ramp up a little bit there, but they did not. Of course, that's totally fine. But we're going to talk about that. Then we're going to get into the playoff picture, because today, and by the time everyone's listening to this, it's probably happening right now, the doubleheader between the Mets and Braves that has some severe playoff implications. And frankly, I love it. And I love when seasons end like this, particularly in baseball, because it's so rare for game 162 to count so much. So, let's get into it, guys. Firstly, the last game of the regular season did not go in any sort of beautiful, kind way. The Padres lost by a score of 11-2. Granted, like I said, they weren't really, trying as much this series. Nick Ahmed was playing shortstop for the team. Xander Bogaerts was not. You didn't have Manny Machado playing today, and then the previous game on Saturday, you didn't have Jackson Merrill, you didn't have Tatis. So clearly just trying to get over the end of the line. Shout out to Brandon Lockridge, though. I will say this weekend did have a nice home run in the Saturday game, which was very nice to see. Even though it feels like he's a stolen base kind of threat, which he did have against the Dodgers, if people remember. But still, nice little moment for him. Overall, in this game, not much to talk about. Luis Arraez does rip a double, and that is important for a very, very significant reason. I'll get to that in a second. Nick Ahmed does go 1 for 3. Jake Cronenworth has an RBI. It's basically it. Nothing else happened. In terms of the pitchers, I say this is the biggest takeaway, is that we had an appearance from our boy Martin Perez, and he gets absolutely lit up. 3 2/3, 6 earned runs on 8 hits, 2 walks, 3 Ks. We've been talking about for a while that basically every pitching acquisition the Padres have made since the deadline has had a really low ERA, especially out of the bullpen. With Ha-Seong, Tanner Scott, and Jason Adam. Those guys have all been immaculate. And, Martin Perez, he had a really good ERA too. In fact, when it came to this season with the Padres, he was really, really good. Although one of the things we've talked about, and why I don't think he's a starter for the postseason, I doubt that he would be unless something really catastrophic happened, like, say, any sort of injuries or anything like that. I think the only thing that could happen is that they could utilize him in a way that's very... like maybe if one of their pitchers gets blown up, maybe he comes in as a piggyback starter, maybe a Darvish who's just working his way back, maybe something like that. But overall, Perez with the Padres, significantly better than he was with the Pirates. 5.2 ERA with the Pirates, and then 3.46 with the Padres. He did increase his strikeout rate just a little bit, which was nice. But overall, this is not something that I think people should be freaking out about or whatnot, because his FIP during this period with the Padres was about a 4.86, which suggested that while his ERA was low before yesterday's start at about a 2.7, 2.6 range, that meant that he was getting a little bit lucky. It is good that he did increase his strikeout rate. He did change up his pitch usage, so I do think he has at least a role on this team, but overall, do not think that the Padres found some diamond in the rough who's going to be a Game 4 starter in the playoffs. That's not how I would approach this, but speaking of a diamond in the rough, Matt Waldron, unfortunately, does not. He makes his return. He's coming up from AAA, 4 innings, gets lit up for 4 runs on 8 hits, does strike out 3, but that was really unfortunate. I loved the Matt Waldron experience while it lasted. I really did. It was such a blast. And it ended really poorly. Like in the second half, just guys were keying in on that knuckleball, and his sweeper was not hitting the outside corner the way it was supposed to, the way that he was most successful. And same thing goes for his slider. Like, it just was not working. And before this, his last start, before he got set down, he gave up 10 earned runs on 12 hits to the Minnesota Twins back in August 21st. So, like, again, Matt Waldron, it was fun while it lasted, but I'm going to miss him. I'm going to miss him. And it's things like that I was, like, getting sentimental over Matt Waldron yesterday. Just seeing him again, my boy. Just seeing this guy again and just being reminded of, like, there was so much stuff that went right for the Padres, even though Waldron did get sent down, and it feels like the league kind of keyed in on him, and this is why the knuckleball is a pitch that has kind of gone out of style, because people seem to figure it out in today's age more. But it was still cool seeing him, and I still really enjoyed that. And I just think that overall, there's just been so much success on this Padres team this year that even though he was good for basically just the first half of the season, it was still an immaculate first half, and that was really something needed while King and Darvish and Musgrove and even occasionally Cease were trying to, get their bearings, and in some case coming back from injury. So we still love you, Matt Waldron, very, very much. That's for the Friday game. In terms of, or the Sunday game, the Saturday game, the Padres accidentally won this one. What I mean by accidentally is because, again, they did not have their full starters. They did not have Tatis. They did not have Merrill. Brandon Lockwood just playing in center field. Tyler Wade in right field. Like, they weren't at full force there. Whatever, it didn't matter. Instead, and remember, the Diamondbacks are really trying to win these games. And Randy Vasquez comes in and has one of his best starts of the year. 6 innings, only 1 hit, no earned runs, 1 walk, 4 Ks. Like, that's pretty nuts. The Padres end up winning this game by a final score of 5-0. And again, like, if I'm the Diamondbacks fan base, I would be just outraged at this. I'd be incensed at this. Not only did you get a break in terms of the starting pitching, you also got a little bit of break from the lineup, and you don't even score a run against Randy Vasquez, who we've talked about before. I still think needs some work. I think he's more of a long-term bullpen piece, and he comes in and kind of does well. His cutter was working pretty well. Generated 4 whiffs on that. Changeup generated 3 whiffs. He was doing okay. And then the bullpen shuts them down. Brian Hoeing, Wandy Peralta even, and Yuki Matsui. Nice to see Matsui kind of having a couple of decent showings, specifically 4 of them, since he got last lit up for like 6 runs in 3 games. 2 strikeouts in this one. That was very nice. But overall, if I'm a D-backs fan, I'm like I said, I'm incensed at this to see that we are getting a layup potential game, and the Padres aren't even at full force. They don't have anything to play for, and you get shut out at home. That's a rough sell. And if the Diamondbacks don't end up making the playoffs based on how today's doubleheader goes, that will be the game. This will be the series, in fact, especially that game that you'll look back on and be like, what the heck was that, man? So really crazy stuff. But we got to talk about more guys than just those 2 games. We're going to quickly recap Friday's game and then talk about some other nice, juicy stuff. But first, I must take a moment to talk to you about our friends over at FanDuel, the initial first sponsor, top of the podcast of this show. FanDuel, ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you, you get a big return. And all you football fans out there, it's America's #1 sports book. So when you get in a hunch in the middle of the game, if you yesterday were one of those people who said, you know what, I like the way the Vikings are going, I'm going with the Vikings, I think they're going to be 4-0 with Sam Darnold, you can do that with FanDuel. View live play-by-play and so much more on the same page where you place your bets with the app. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Check that out. $5 and you get $200 in guaranteed bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Check it out, guys. It is fantastic as always. And just like that, everybody, we are back here on the Locked On Padres podcast, thriving and vibing, recapping the last game of the series. Not going to lie, I am a casual, and here's the problem with that. Yes, have I been covering this team for more than 5 years? Yes, but I actually hate them secretly, as many of you in the comments have pointed out. And I forgot that Darvish did pitch this weekend. He pitched on Friday, and the reason I forgot is because I had a dinner, plan reservation with some good friends that I attended on Friday, so I just kind of forgot that it was Darvish. I did see the highlights, but I just forgot about it. But Darvish kind of did Darvish things in this one. 5 innings, 5 1/3 specifically, gives up 3 earned runs on 3 hits, 3 walks, 4 Ks. Just gave a solid outing. And I think that that's kind of what the Padres are hoping for. I don't think we should necessarily expect full prime Darvish in the postseason. There is still, look, we love this team, but if there's like a question for the Padres' future, and we'll get into that in November after the team wins the World Series, of course. But in terms of, the long-term contract of Darvish, there are some worries. Now, don't get me wrong, I still think he's a great pitcher. The fact that his fastball velo has kind of stayed mostly the same throughout his career is really enticing. It's really gives you reason for optimism. But even still, being this old, it's it's going to be freaky at times. And you see in this game, though, a little bit. He did give up some big hits in this one, specifically from Corbin Carroll. Hits an absolute bomb in the bottom of the first inning. And it's funny that the Padres basically begin all their scoring in this game at the top, with Manny Machado getting a single, Jackson Merrill getting an RBI single, Xander Bogaerts hits into a fielder's choice as usual, and then David Peralta hits a single. It is so cool the way that this entire team, like the entire lineup, is so damn deep, man. I mean, it's one of the deepest lineups probably in baseball right now, currently, out of all the playoff teams. I'm serious. Like, the Phillies have some great players too, don't get me wrong. The Mets have a really great lineup too, but I love the way that they can bring in a David Peralta or Donovan Solano or, anyone of that sort of caliber, and still expect something. I think off the bench is really, really exciting. Even Kyle Higashioka for much of the season was a pretty good offensive catcher, so that's really great to see. Overall in this game, though, that's basically it. Jackson Merrill has 2 hits, including a double. Unfortunately, the vibe that I'm getting is that it's going to be Skeens. I've joked a lot on this podcast lately that I think you're a fool for voting for Paul Skeens, but not really. I think that if there's going to be someone that wins that's a pitcher, it is Skeens. I do empathize, though, with Padres fans who are frustrated because if you're like me, the Padres have really been, outside Gold Gloves, really missed out on a lot of awards. I do think that Manny Machado should have won the MVP. I understand that Goldschmidt had like some better batting statistics, but my thing is, Machado came into that season and you knew, and he knew, I have to carry the load offensively because we don't have the bats right now and Tatis is suspended, and he succeeded in full-fledged and then also played amazing defense and was a big reason that the team was so good for much of that year, because not like their offense was that great. That Padres season was a little bit, not fluky, but a little bit luck-based, where they just happened to score a little bit at the right time and their bullpen shut things down a little bit. Same thing for starting pitching. But remember, like, Jorge Alfaro hit like 5 walk-offs that season, so it was a little bit lucky. And the reason I had him over Goldschmidt is because the literal third-place nominee for MVP was Nolan Arenado. How are you the MVP when the other MVP nominee is on your team? I'm sorry, called me old-fashioned, but I just can't do that. You know what I mean? I just don't get it. I don't get how that's the thing. And I hope that it doesn't happen in the American League this year with Bobby Witt versus Aaron Judge. Because Aaron Judge, great season, don't get me wrong, this isn't like the Arenado thing. Like, Judge is on a next level of playing well. But the other MVP nominee is his teammate. And then Bobby Witt Jr. literally has the best shortstop season in the history of the sport, at least according to fan wins above replacement. So that's just a peek into my mind and how these things work. And then you have the Devin Williams thing, where Devin Williams won Rookie of the Year over Jake Cronenworth. Not something I mind, but it was, once again, it's like, really? I thought that pitchers never win this thing. And I know he was great that year, but it was very like, of course, the one time we vote for the pitcher instead of the position player that plays every day, it's against the Padres. And the same thing here. But I will say that I am full force. It should have been Manny. I'm like 60% it should have been Jake, although I don't know for sure, but that one I'm open to a degree. This one I think is really as fair if Paul Skeens wins. I'm sorry. Like, the guy has the lowest ERA since like 1910 for a rookie pitcher. Like, the stuff Merrill's doing is amazing, and it's probably more overall impactful, but I just think this is the best young pitcher season we've probably ever seen. And it's not just the girlfriend thing. But anyway, that's just my thoughts. Also, Luis Arraez in this Friday game. That was a very stark, tough transition, but Luis Arraez in this Friday game, he rips a double, RBI double in this one, or 2 doubles, my mistake, and a triple for the RBI. Luis Arraez, we haven't mentioned it yet. Fun stuff. History. He became the first player in MLB history to win 3 consecutive batting titles with 3 different teams. That is nutty, nutty, nutty. Just absolutely phenomenal stuff. Love Luis Arraez. He did kind of limp towards the finish line in this third year. And I say that because he was hurt. Of course, I'm not like making fun of him. Let me be very clear. But he was hurt for this year, so he limped a little bit. He wasn't hitting for as many extra base hits. He wasn't walking as much. We saw it, Padres fans. You guys saw it. And he wasn't as amazing until later, until the end, like this last month, really, when he really started kicking up. And I think that there's a really funny dichotomy between the sports nerds and then just the casual like sports enjoyers when it comes to Luis Arraez, where they think he's if you're a nerd, they think he's the most overrated player ever, and if you're just someone who enjoys sports, you're like, this is cool, this guy literally always gets on base and always hits, even though some of his metrics, he doesn't hit the ball that hard, he doesn't hit for power, he's like a player that got plucked from the 1970s. I think that that's awesome too. I'm more on that side. I will say that this version of Arraez was not as good as the usual run, right? That is just objectively speaking, I think that was a thing. Hit into a lot more double plays with the Padres than he did with the Marlins. Granted, in more games, but last couple of years, that was an unfortunate aspect of this. But overall, like, still a really good player. His OPS has not been lower than 744 in a little bit, so love to see that. And I think that he was hurt, and I think that it explains a lot. Yes, he wasn't hitting the 354. 393 on base that he did last year with the Marlins, but overall, such a fun player to watch, and he got healthy and good at the perfect time. So hopefully, ladies and gentlemen, we're gonna get that playoff moment that I've been dreaming of. But 3 consecutive years, it's like, ignore the stats. I don't care. No one's saying he's the best hitter in the sport. I don't think that's real. If the old heads are saying that, ignore them. Just appreciate how great this is. Love to see it. Absolutely love to see it. And in terms of other things, folks, that's it for the regular season. It was really good vibes. I'm currently working on just putting together my favorite moments of the Padres regular season. We'll probably do that at some point, maybe next week or Friday, depending on how this series goes. And we don't know who the Padres are playing. Now comes the hard part, because based on what happens in this doubleheader determines potentially who the Padres will end up playing. Specifically in terms of just who makes the playoffs, the Braves and the Mets have a doubleheader today. And again, I love it when these things happen, but basically, if a split were to happen between these 2 games, then the Diamondbacks would be eliminated. If the Braves sweep, then the Mets are eliminated, and then the Braves and Diamondbacks are in, and then the Mets sweep is the inverse of that, where the Mets clinch, Braves are out, and then the Diamondbacks are also in. So that's kind of what this is. It's either clinch. So again, we're going to see it, but the split is possible. And then also the Braves, they just need to win 1 game, and then they against the Mets to reach the postseason as the number 5 seed. All right. And then a sweep, however, would eliminate them from the playoffs. Same thing goes for the Mets. If they do a sweep, then they get the 5 seed. If the Braves just win 1, then they get the 5 seed. So all that will determine who the Padres end up playing. Right. And I am very, very nervous because I would very much love to play the Braves because I have some love for the Mets. That's why I don't want to play them. I got some love for them. You guys know I love Francisco Lindor. So that's how I'm viewing it. Just because either way, it's still it's one series. It's an elimination series. Either way, it's going to be tough and very stressful. So I'm not trying to look at it from necessarily a matchup standpoint. I will say that while the Mets starting pitching has been pretty good throughout, right? Like their whole rotation has been very, very solid. The Braves do scare me more in terms of the pitching because they have Chris Sale, who's probably going to win the Cy Young. They have Reynaldo Lopez, who's been very good this year. And Max Fried, former Padre, he's shown that he can be a playoff superstar sort of contender. So I'm rooting for playing the Braves just because I don't like them, and I do kind of like the Mets. But in terms of who's the better matchup, it's probably the Mets, only if we're going based off of the fact that the Mets rotation is full of a lot of guys who I think have overachieved, and they don't have the same name value that you're kind of expecting out of the way that those other guys, right? Like Sean Manaea, Severino, David Peterson, Tyler McGill, those guys don't scare you. And then if you're looking at the bullpen, Edwin Diaz has been really hit or miss basically all year, right? I know he has the 3.29 ERA, but he's had some really bad moments. So you probably rather play the Mets, right? But me, give me the Braves, man. Give me the Braves. But they are definitely, there's an outside chance that the Braves are like this sleeper team that just stinks all year. And I know it's the reality of baseball. It's kind of almost unfair that you can stink it up the whole season, but then if you get hot for 2 games, that's all it takes. It is kind of dumb, which is why maybe sometimes I take it easy on the Dodgers fans, you know what I mean? But overall, that's just how I'm viewing it. So can't wait to see how it shakes out. Gonna be a blast either way. Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, we've got games, folks, and it's stressful. It's very stressful, and that's why I've been kind of pleading to the high heavens to try and just enjoy the vibes that you've had this whole season, because it could be over in an instant. But guys, speaking of over an instant, this podcast is not over. Horrible transition, forgive me. But I got to talk to you guys for a second about our friends over at Game Time. And here's the thing, ladies and gentlemen, Game Time. What I love about them is they got you covered for all sort of events, whether it be the baseball, whether it be any sport venue. You want to go to the NFL, you want to go to the NBA, the WNBA playoffs and the finals are going to be coming up. You want to go to a NASCAR race, I bet you they've got you up there. And also on all sorts of other events like theater, concerts, comedy clubs. They've got all sorts of tickets and all sorts of deals. And they have a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets, among many other nice promotions and benefits that Game Time has, including zone deals and last minute ticket stuff and views from your seats, all sort of great features. Go check out Game Time, guys. All you have to do is download the app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. And just like that, everybody, we are back, thriving and vibing into the third segment of this here podcast, and it is the Mailbag segment, where you guys can send in your questions at Javipeno, Javiipeno, or at @LO_Padres, or I sometimes read the YouTube comments just to see what you guys are saying, because I like to keep them on their toes, you know what I mean? Because I've had some trolls in there before. I forgot Hope Springs Eternal, I think, was one of them. You might still be watching, mister. We got some trolls in there, and I like just highlighting and exposing you all for the frauds you can be. I'm kidding, of course. This is always a lot of fun, and thank you guys for always sending in the nice comments. Like, for example, saw a nice little comment, a bunch of them actually, from when the Padres had clinched. One from Brett G274 with just the little yellow heart emojis, and with Pete, you know what I mean? And shout outs to Pete Seidler. I did not talk about him enough when the Padres had clinched, but that added on to the magic of what this season has been. In fact, this team has been so magical. Look, I'm not going to get into like religion and all that stuff, but depending on how you walk through life and what you believe in, it is pretty nuts that the Padres have been this good and had their best kind of franchise season basically since '84, possibly since '98, possibly ever. And then it was, for Peter Seidler, they have the PS patch. And then not only that, but doing a little bit of research, this season, the Padres have a 148 OPS plus in late and close situations. That is the second best in the history of baseball, only to the first place 2009 Yankees, who had a 163 OPS plus in late and close games. That according to Baseball Reference. And by the way, the Yankees ended up winning the World Series that year, so that's pretty good. Other teams include the Reds from 1970, Brooklyn Dodgers from 1947, and the Phillies, or Philadelphia. What was it? Philadelphia? What is it at? The Philly Athletics back then in 1915? I don't remember, but that's what it is. Amazing stuff from the Padres. And for you to have that this season of all seasons, again, I'm not going to share my personal religious views and whatnot, but my gosh, that is amazing stuff. Amazing, magical, surrealist, peaceful stuff, dare I say. Absolutely love to see it. Some other comments, though, that I very much enjoyed from @AY2121 /I4Y. That's a password? I've been tuning into MLB because of Ohtani's historical run this year. Gotta say, the Padres are the team to beat, though, in the playoffs. They have more swag than the Dodgers. Dodgers pitching is giving up way too many runs. Would like to see you, Darvish, get a ring. The way the Dodgers fans treated him after that World Series was inappropriate. I actually agree with you, by the way. I actually agree with you in the latter act of that. I'm not going to say, I think this team does have a little bit more swag than the Dodgers. I think they always do have more swag than the Dodgers, because the Dodgers low-key, aren't that cool. Mookie Betts is cool. Freddie Freeman is beloved. I understand that. They're not always cool, though. You know what I mean? The coolest thing about them was, the Cody Bellinger, dumb memes about him and looking high during the World Series or whatever. I'm just saying, I feel like that's, is that fair? Am I being too biased? I don't know. But anyway, I do agree with you on that last point, though. The way that the Dodgers fans treat you, Darvish, like, again, I don't know why this fan base acts like they run everything and that they are the Tony Soprano of baseball. Like, he's not the only reason y'all lost. What about Clayton Kershaw? You guys go out of your way to defend him nonstop, and he is the biggest choke artist of our generation when it comes to starting pitchers. That guy was unquestionably the best pitcher of my generation, of this generation, unquestionably first ballot Hall of Famer, and he significantly declined in the postseason on many, many occasions. But you've given you Darvish more flack, it feels like. Yeah, Darvish had a bad postseason, and guess what postseason it was? I believe 2017, when the Astros were cheating. So yeah, the Astros were cheating and robbed you guys, but no, Darvish it was his fault. So I actually, just to be a little bit biased and, tribalist about my Padres and Dodgers rivalry, I kind of agree with you, man. So anyway, moving on though. Another comment from @mankid3894. Are they going to let Matsui pitch in the playoffs? If not, will they bring Alec Jacob or Sean Reynolds to the playoffs instead of Matsui? Great question. We'll see kind of how the playoff roster is finalized tomorrow. I still think that they like Matsui. I think that overall they think that his stuff is really good. And Reynolds and Jacob, I'm curious about just if they want those guys in that high leverage kind of playoff situation. At least Matsui in Japan had some great, championship winning kind of moments. So maybe that's what they're thinking. But let me tell you, man, Matsui has playoff disaster written all over him. Like, just from my perspective, there's been way too many times this year when it feels like in the biggest spots. And I'm not just necessarily saying like when the game's tied or they had a lead, but even when the Padres are down by like 1 or 2 runs, he would then give up like a 2-run home run or a 3-run home run that then put it even further out of grasp, which says a lot because this Padres team, what have they been known for? Comebacks and winning late in games. So all they need is a little bit of room and they can make that comeback for you. And it just feels like he was very, very disastrous this year, right? Like, just it really feels like he did not step up when the Padres really needed him the most. So, that's just me. I could be dead wrong, but alas, we'll have to see how that picks out. And then same goes for Jacob and Reynolds, who I'm really excited about, but I almost feel like there's almost, dare I say, too many mouths to feed in the bullpen. There's so many good guys, from Estrada to Suarez to Scott to Adam to Hoeing to, it just feels like they have a lot. Is it just me? Morejon, I don't know. So we're going to see how that all shakes up. I'm really curious to see the final playoff roster tomorrow, but I am fairly certain Matsui will make it. I'd be a little bit surprised if he didn't. But thank you, sir, for the question. It's a great question. Another one coming from @Koji_H on YouTube says, how important is playoff experience in MLB? We've been to the playoffs in recent years, but haven't reached the World Series. I'm hoping we can get to the World Series, but afraid we'll get outcoached or outplayed by experience. This is a tough question. And I think that one of the things with the playoffs is that it's just, there's so many things about the regular season you kind of have to throw out, right? Like, I think you have to throw out sometimes like how hot a player has been in terms of their batting when they head into the series, because it's just a whole new ball game. I think I'm working on a thesis that, like, I don't know if defense is all that crazy, because the Phillies have been going absolutely nuts in the postseason for a while now. Sure, they haven't made the World Series, despite what their fans will have you think, but they have had like 2-3 of the worst defenders in all of baseball on their team, and that hasn't affected them in the postseason. So I don't know if defense is just a tad overrated there. It might be. I'm not totally sure. Playoff experience, I think it matters a little bit, but it's something that you can't quantify as much, because at the same time, we've seen so many players that blow up that are great before. And this is not like, players that we've never seen before or haven't heard of before that have absolute miracle seasons in the postseason. Some players who have great seasons and continue them, and they were young, like Juan Soto, right? Like, Juan Soto was immediately great in the postseason, helped the Nationals win their World Series. Same thing goes, hopefully, for Jackson Merrill. So we'll see if that pans out. But this isn't like basketball. I think basketball is the greatest example of playoff experience of the 3 major sports, where like that really, really matters. I think coaching in the NFL matters, but in my experience, the NBA, it's like the playoff experience matters, because the regular season is just a total new ball game in terms of just people trying. They don't try as much in the regular season in the NBA. That's just kind of a fact. I'm not blaming them. That's a whole can of worms to unpack. But I think that it matters more there. But you can at least hope for, hey, Bogaerts has been there before, right? Manny Machado has been there before. Tatis has been there before. Joe Musgrove has been there before. Darvish has been there before. I think you can hope that, like, one of these guys are like, they're not going to be thrown off by the big spotlight. And maybe that's one of the reasons why I'm still hopeful that Xander Bogaerts can make an impact for this team in the postseason, even if he hasn't as much during the regular season. But that's just me. Impossible to quantify. And again, with the teams that do have playoff experience, look at the Dodgers. They lose every year, right? So that doesn't necessarily always amount to anything. Then I got a really good question. This one from at Zachary Shelton at LO_Padres at LO_Padres. Mailbag question. Do you think we have seen the last of Ha-Seong Kim in a Padres uniform? This was the last year of his contract and he didn't play great, and then he's also been out with an injury and it's getting season ending surgery. Yeah, I think that because of the surgery, and I think that, look, Machado loves him, so maybe there's a little bit of an incentive. This has been a very player-friendly front office. Maybe there's an incentive to re-sign him. I will say that, and I'll say what I've said before, and actually has to do with the next question we're going to answer, that, I don't know, Kim is just like a utility defensive solid player. I don't know if that's necessarily what the Padres want to bring in, especially when they already have Bogaerts, who we've seen play some more shortstop recently. And by the way, he's not going to be a Gold Glove winning shortstop, but he's been very, very solid there. You can move Jake Cronenworth off of first base and put him at second, where he has thrived before, and that's why you got some of his best wins or perfect placement seasons, because he can add his defensive value more so at second base than first. So I could see that kind of playing out. I really could. Because they already have something on the roster. And then also another potentially multi-year contract to a shortstop when you also have Leody DeVries, who's like this superstar like prospect who's very young. Don't get me wrong, he's raw. But do you want to have that much clogging up the lane? You already have Bogaerts for a while. So do you really want to be having another shortstop, which would then really seriously block this team's ability to bring up DeVries, unless they have another like Jackson Merrill-esque idea to just have him play a new position he's never played before, even though he's very good apparently defensively. So that's my thing. I think for that reason, you don't see him coming back. That's just me. But then it also goes into another question from Paul Benny, who messaged me this a while ago. I apologize, sir. This was back, I think, 2 weeks ago before last week's mailbag. I didn't get a chance to answer it, but he says, can only pay one. Kim or Arraez, who and why? Personally, I think Arraez, Kim's a goner, sadly. I agree with you on the last part. I do think Kim's a goner, but let's take this in a vacuum. Luis Arraez, batting champ 3 times in a row, horrific defensively. And also, do you still want to keep betting as he gets older on this bat speed, on his ability to put the ball in play all over across the diamond? Maybe. And then Ha-Seong Kim, who maybe 2023 was a little bit of an outlier where his offense is just always going to be okay. Maybe he's a 103 WRC plus guy and then plays great defense. I think it's tough because I think if you stick Luis Arraez at first base. Now here's the thing. Arraez is very bad defensively. This is a problem. That's why this is actually a great question. And I really love that you asked it, sir. I think that one of my things that I've been noticing is, first of all, Arraez is like genuinely very bad. I don't want to discount that, but I don't always know how defense will translate. I'm just not convinced that defense is as much of a lock, because I feel like everyone knows they're like, yeah, bats go up and down. Sometimes you have a great season or you have Manny Machado's 2023, right? Like it just happens sometimes where you have an off year. But for me, I'm like, are we sure that doesn't happen with defense? Tatis was a Platinum Glove winner last year, and in terms of defensive metrics, did not have his best defensive season. He actually wasn't all that great, right? The Padres in general weren't all that great defensively this year. And I think that that's worth pointing out, just to be like, it's not a guarantee. And if his bat is something that also isn't a guarantee, I just don't know how comfortable I feel shelling out the money. Now, I will say, again, part of this is in a vacuum, right? Because I just mentioned in the previous question that having DeVries, having Bogaerts, having the Jake Cronenworth thing gives them maneuverability where I think that they can afford to not have him, right? But in a vacuum, let's just pretend they don't have the two. I think it's tough because I think Arraez, that defensive stuff is really a mess, right? But he's been a high 3 wins player before, even despite the defense. And if you were to stick him at first base, I think that that's the one position where the defense can be hidden a little bit more than the others. Don't get me wrong, you still have to be great. And I think that one of the problems is that then, you're not getting as much production. You kind of have the Jake Cronenworth problem where you're not getting as much offensive production at first base. So it's really, really hard, guys. Like, I genuinely don't know. I think, and they're both young, right? They're both very young. Arraez is 27. I think it's a question of defense versus offense. I think it depends on what your team is shaken out to be. I think if your thing is we already have a lot of good defensive players, maybe you bring in Arraez because he's just going to be a guy who hits all the time. Or Kim, where even if he's not hitting, the defensive stuff, assuming it keeps up, will make him a great player. I mean, think about it. Luis Arraez this year, with the Padres in total for 2024. He had 1.1 wins above replacement. Last year, 3.3. His great season, wins above replacement. Compare that to Ha-Seong Kim. Ha-Seong Kim, who, by the way, again, was really struggling at times this year. Ha-Seong Kim's wins above replacement total this year was 2.6. And then last year, 4.2. And that's good. That's with a 101 WRC plus this year and 110 last year. So even if he's not hitting, this guy's defense is giving you huge value. And not to mention, he could play defense at second. He could play defense at short. And we've also seen he could play at third. So that versatility, I think, matters a lot. So I think it's for that reason, even if he's not as fun because you don't get to see the hits go vroom, I think you do that, and maybe you hope, maybe we can tinker his swing. He's got a little bit more power than Luis Arraez. You've seen him luck into, not totally luck into, but he hit 17 home runs last year, stolen bases as well. He's a great base runner. I think you go Kim, because I think there are more aspects of his game that are a plus than a minus, as opposed to Arraez, who could be a really great hitter, but he's always going to be negative defensively unless something really weird happens. You know what I mean? And then he just dramatically changes somehow. But that's just me. I would love to hear what you guys think in the comments. Last question comes from the always lovely Rama Murdy, who says, question for Monday's show. Has this Padres team exceeded your expectations? What do we have to do to get MLB to allow Dotted Mud to be allowed to call the playoff games? Thanks for being with us all season. Thank you, sir. Love you all very much. Man, I'd love if Don and Mud called the games all offseason. I actually tweeted like how they're Kobe and Shaq. Absolutely adore those two. I don't know. I mean, it wouldn't shock me if at some point they bring them in. Right, because they're clearly one of the best duos like in all of baseball. Like I don't think anyone really objects to that. This isn't me being a Padres fan either, or a homer, but I don't know. I would love that. In terms of this team exceeding expectations, I think that I had a good feeling that the Padres would be good this year, for a lot of the reasons we've talked about countless times. We've talked about this throughout the season. They were historically bad in the clutch last year. Their roster didn't change too much outside Soto. They still had a lot of superstars. Just the way the sport works, you usually rubber band in the other direction. In baseball, not in football, not in basketball, but in baseball. You don't go from the least clutch team of the last 25 years to then just being, again, super unclutched. That just does not seem to happen. And you saw it was a huge rubber band slingshotted the other direction this season, with them being historically the second best by Baseball Reference in late and close games that we've literally ever seen outside the 2009 Yankees. So that part I did not expect. I did not expect them to be this good, right? I don't know if I expected 93 wins. I just expected that they would be a lot better. I did not know what to expect necessarily from your Musgrove, Darvish, the rotation, but I expected like a good 86, 87 win team. I kind of expected what they were going to be in the position the D-backs were in terms of the win count. That's kind of what I expected. I did not expect for them to be this historically good in the clutch, and for guys like Jackson Merrill to be unbelievably good their rookie season. It's kind of like the how they did it. Does that make sense? Don't get me wrong. Tatis, Machado, they were still great, but it's the fact that they got so much out of guys like Peralta, got so much out of guys like Jurickson Profar being the biggest example. Nobody saw that coming, right? Nobody saw this coming from Jurickson Profar. Guys like him, the Merrill breakout season, Michael King being this good, this consistent, basically all season long outside the first month. That part I didn't expect. But in terms of just a better season with a team that would be better last year in driving in runs, I did expect that. And that's what I was shouting from the mountaintops for the case to be made for them for this season. And it mostly came true. And of course, there were some things I was wrong about, right? Like I was definitely wrong about some things. I loved, Enyel De Los Santos. I love that trade, right? Like I thought Yuki Matsui, Woo-Sak Go. I thought the bullpen was going to be great. Instead, they had to address it at the deadline. And that Fernando Tatis Jr. did not reach his MVP quality stuff that he usually can be capable of. But overall, it exceeded my expectations for how good they were, not necessarily how they got good, if that makes any sense. Hopefully it does. But yeah. That's it, everybody. That's it for the mailbag, and that about does it for today's edition of the Locked On Padres podcast, the only pod that may be better than the Padres themselves. Remember to subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts from. Tomorrow, we will be doing some sort of series preview, whatever, for whoever the Padres end up playing. We're going to have to see whether it's Braves, whether it's Mets, whether it's D-backs, whatever the shakeup is, we will be doing that because it is playoff time. Get hyped! And of course, continue to send me your questions at Javipeno, Javiipeno, or at L_Padres. Big week. Can't wait to get into it. Until that next time, stay safe and of course, stay faithful. My Fire Faithful homies. Take care.